Hi everyone. My name's John Guest. I'm a director at AMION. I head up our strategy, policy, and innovation team. We've been doing a lot of work around the Get Britain Working agenda, working with lots of local areas around different areas of the challenges, but employers has often been sort of a focal point for that work. So and also identified as a challenge. So we were really excited to undertake this work. AMION Consulting are an economic development consultancy. Josh, could I have the next slide, please? We work across a range of different areas, delivering public policy, research, strategy development, business case development, and evaluations. And my work has been around education, skills, and employment. For around 15 years, having worked at Combined Authority previously, but also a couple of consultancy. So our work has been focused around this area. Josh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Josh. I've been working with John for about 3 years now on a number of employment and skills policy agendas, including supporting other combined authorities like East Midlands with their Get East Midlands working plans.
Fabulous. Thank you, Josh. Next slide, please. So, as I indicated, lots of other areas are really interested in employer research, but I have to admit there is often a time in a meeting where we sort of discuss maybe sort of a framework or an area or an idea or a way forward or an intervention, and someone says, "And what about employers?" Employers can be represented in different ways, but actually sort of undertaking that deep research with them is really important. So in terms of today's presentation, Chris has sort of set that up really well. We'll provide a summary of our research findings and recommendations. And this is all around supporting businesses to access opportunity, but also improve good employment opportunities and reduce economic inactivity. We'll run through the research objectives, the methodology. We'll just run through some of the views that we got back from colleagues. Run through some sort of wider context that we also sort of brought in to that once we'd done that research, just sort of as part of that research process. We'll explore some of the recommendations and how they may be taken forward as well. Next slide, please. I think really interesting around the motivations for this study. There are several different motivations. Some of those are around the growth in economic inactive population. Some of it is also around recruitment difficulties, and some of it is around that alignment as well. Certainly, those that work across education and skills may recognise some of the issues and some of the headlines that are on the screen. But effectively, some businesses have skills shortages and skills gaps, and so are looking to sort of address those through training, but also recruitment. But then there's also a lot of people that are economically inactive, and a healthy proportion of those want to get into work. And so there's that is some of the rationale behind the Get Britain Working agenda. Seamlessly there, Josh. Thank you for that. Moving on to that slide, and that's another motivation as well. There's a big strategic context element around this. So thinking about the Get Britain Working agenda and the aspiration around an 80% employment rate. There's the Get York and North Yorkshire working plan, which looks at some of the approaches to meeting that ambition. Which includes engagement with employers, but also thinking of the employment support landscape as a system, and thinking about how can we better connect that up as well. And there's been further research that's been undertaken as well, and that's helping us sort of move forward on this agenda. Next slide, please. Employers play a crucial role in the economy. They play a crucial role in good work as well. And this infographic or diagram, I think, just sort of helps sort of try and convey that in a different way. This is from the NHS. But the NHS clearly see that good work contributes to a range of different outcomes for people, but also for the economy as well. So whilst this is quite people focused, you can probably also think about the dotted line to the economy as well. So, for example, productivity and quality, always learning. There's a dotted line to improvement in our living standards around productivity growth and economic growth as well. So good work has a sort of a central point for us within within this commission, and that was where we sort of started from. Next slide, please. So we were focused on two connected themes. So exploring with employers around retention. How can they better support and better retain staff who might be at risk of leaving their roles due to factors such as long-term health conditions, caring responsibilities, age, but also many more factors, but those are probably sort of three of the big ones. And then also around recruitment, how employers approach recruitment and how they may consider currently sort of perhaps sort of opening up their opportunities to more people that are economically inactive but are seeking to enter the workforce. So we had a series of research objectives. That was to explore perceptions of supporting staff that are at risk of economic inactivity, perceptions around hiring individuals, around barriers to both that retention and recruitment. We explored the support that would enable employers to do more of that. Exploring within the envelope of the research around variations across sectors and sizes, and then looking at some recommendations that could inform future policy interventions, programs, business engagement activities. So in terms of our approach to this work, a series of steps were undertaken through our work, and this meant that we started off with the approach to have a survey. Business surveys at this current moment are challenging, in part because of some of the ongoing engagement that businesses are receiving from agendas like the Local Skills Improvement Plan, from research that's been done in other forums. So I'll revisit that in a minute, but we also undertook a series of workshops across York and North Yorkshire, so some in York, but also some in Selby and across the rest of North Yorkshire as well. A series of interviews, so depth interviews with businesses. I think this is it's really nice to bring people into a setting like a workshop to get that sort of rounded view, but the interviews were really key for sort of nailing down on some of the issues and exploring those in a lot more detail. And we also explored through desk research. So once we had some of those themes emerging, we had a look at what is some of the other research that others are saying around that. So academic research, but also grey industry literature as well. We had to take an adaptive approach to this because, as I referenced sort of earlier, some of the overlapping engagement activities around surveys meant that survey was going to be sort of challenging within that. In fact, we brought in a survey partner to sort of boost responses on that. And it might be the topic, it might have been the time of year, but equally it might have been a bit of fatigue around that. So as a result, we placed greater emphasis on one-to-one interviews, but also participated in business networking events where we were able to speak to businesses one-on-one, you know, for say 10, 20 minutes, capture information from that within a similar setting to a one-to-one interview. Next slide, please, Josh. And this is just a taste of some of the businesses and organisations and employers that we spoke to through that. Many of these were SMEs, which gave us a really interesting sort of angle on what that looked like. But some of these are also sort of names that you perhaps see as perhaps
Right.
even commuting into work as well. Um, uh, Excellent. Right.
Ah,
Josh, if I can just hand over to you and then we'll run
yes.
through the research.
Yeah, fab. So this first section is just focusing on the views we heard from employers when we were asking them to discuss their thoughts on those who've been out of work for a while, recruitment challenges they potentially had, or perceptions on recruiting them, and then also retention. Um, to begin, most conversations began with discussing either one or multiple of these contextual factors. And the first one being the policy and economic context. I'm sure we're all broadly familiar with the economic challenges of recent years, but it was also highlighted to us about tax changes and national insurance being particularly challenging for hospitality and retail businesses, senses of uncertainty about what the new employment rights laws meant in practice for businesses and organisations, and those particularly who might have been reliant on flexible zero-hours contracts before. And this created a general sense of uncertainty around recruitment and retention decisions at the moment, contributing to what you might have been seeing in the headlines generally has been described as a bit of a labour market freeze at the moment. Just wanted to hold on to current staff, but unsure about recruiting at this time. The emergence of AI was particularly for the conversation with professional services and desk-based roles. There was cautious optimism about its productivity potential, and they're very much in stages of experimentation with it. And I think combined with the policy and economic context at the time, it was leading them to review, what different skills they might need in the future. And particularly for some small organisations, they were saying, well, I don't think we're going to take on a graduate this year in particular. We're just going to see what we can do with AI at the moment. The other element that was also brought up was transport. This is a familiar story, particularly for those in rural areas, highlighted its limitation on recruitment and it being a structural challenge. And this is something that's particularly more challenging for people who are economically inactive or been out of work. They're less likely to have access to a car and to reach certain locations that where the job opportunities might be. So these factors really framed a lot of the conversations we were having and were the starting point of the conversations. On recruiting economically inactive, this is to summarize the four most kind of common perspectives that were put to us. So some did not view a period of being out of work really as too much of a barrier. They were much more focused on, is it the right person? Do they have the right attitudes? Have they got the right values? This was more common among employees with available entry-level roles that didn't necessarily need a qualification. They would have in-house training or onboarding processes, so they'd be able to they had confidence that they could develop the skills internally as they needed them. So for them, economic inactivity or being out of work wasn't so much of a barrier in their views. They could see the potential of this as a recruitment pool. The main concerns of caution that were raised to us were around skills and concerns about skills and capabilities. So that could be concerns around basic digital and IT skills, fear that those who have kind of been out of the workforce, particularly around 5 years plus, may have fallen behind. And then sectors that required specialist technical skills, either in professional services, but also this could be in trades. They also kind of viewed the qualification, the necessary qualification. There's always this kind of almost slight assumption, whilst it is more common that people who have been out of work do not have qualifications, there's always this assumption of kind of pre-categorizing who an out of work person was, or somebody who's been out of work for a long time. The other element was work readiness and reliability. So concerns around punctuality, presentation, workplace behaviours. There was, young people were kind of grouped under this quite often. Talk about those who've been out of work for, who've never really potentially had a full-time job or a job before. Concerns around issues of confidence, anxiety, and for some businesses, they kind of associated this with risks around, well, are they going to commit to the onboarding process? They could, even when in the interviewing process, they've noticed kind of recent changes around, are people in interviews kind of being more nervous? And so this was an interesting dynamic that was brought up. Really, that was quite common, and being able to kind of stem the concerns that because somebody might not have a previous employer to reference, that we can demonstrate that they have these work readiness skills and these soft skills. The fourth element was quite a few organisations didn't really have exposure to candidates who had been out of work for a long period of time. This kind of suggests that there's potentially an engagement challenge, a supply side challenge, but this lack of exposure reinforces the uncertainty and assumptions around skills and work readiness and so forth. When it came to retention and supporting staff who potentially at risk of leaving, very broadly, organisations were really positive in principle, wanting to support employees about retaining their workforce, particularly they would reference those who are older, more experienced staff, the importance of keeping them and appreciating that's important for the business. But these were underpinned by a couple of factors that potentially would really harm this being what would happen in practice. And I think it was interesting when we were having the conversations that people, we were talking to those who represented groups of employers or who maybe had HR consultants who had clients, the different kind of aspects that they would see as potentially important versus those who are employers themselves, but I'll come on to that in a second. So the first is the limitation on people-focused aspects of the business, quote unquote. So this is really looking at the time for one-on-ones, budgets for learning and development and well-being. There's generally, it was kind of seen as, given the economic challenges, the financial constraints organizations have been on, that this was an aspect of the business that kind of could be put to a side or, scaled down a bit. And sometimes those decisions would not be almost deliberate, they'd just kind of happen over time. Just the quote highlighting here from a hospitality organization around learning and development budget being reduced over a period of 10 years. Another key factor was the workplace culture, and it's seen as highly influential on an organisation's ability to keep staff and support them and to prevent exit. Factors around, can there be open and honest communication? Do employees feel trusted? Do they feel trusted and have a sense of autonomy in their role? Is it a safe environment to raise issues? These prevent what could be relatively smaller issues from being addressed when they arise to scaling up and then becoming a reason for exit. These are shaped by senior leadership, and I think there's a bit of a catch with this because the organisations that probably most need or need to support or to improve their workplace culture are often those who are probably less likely to engage with support, because it takes that kind of self-recognition by the senior leadership. And I think it was interesting as well, speaking to the business representative organizations and the HR consultants talked about, some organizations would almost engage transactionally with this because they thought, oh, this is the right thing to do to engage with the support, but then wouldn't always be implementing the recommendations or having to kind of take on that it's the senior leadership who need to change the behaviours necessarily. And it isn't just writing a bit of policy on a piece of paper. The other views on retention and the causes of people leaving relate to kind of structural and job-related constraints that were almost seen by some organisations as like a bit immovable. So they just thought higher turnover was an inherent feature of these roles, and there's not as much they could do about it. So it's characterised by demanding conditions, poor weather exposure, high pressure customer interactions, and flexible working patterns. And coupled also with limited or unclear progression pathways or sight of a long-term career ladder. And they would note that they've tried to do things to improve these like de-escalation training or improving the kit that they bought their staff for the weather, but it didn't have much impact on reducing people leaving those roles. Except one anchor organisation noted that when they became a real living wage employer, it did reduce their turnover in cleaning and catering roles, as they felt it made them more competitive than comparators. The other element that was highlighted to us when we asked them about what are their views on trying to retain people who may be at risk of leaving, and this comes back to the young people. It's often the first place actually people would go on both the recruitment and the retention challenges. They'd frequently recite that they have just different expectations for work, and there was a mixture in how open some employers kind of, some saw it as, well, we just have to adapt to it, and they were very almost happy to, and some kind of going, oh, I guess we're gonna have to do this now, a bit more begrudging to do so. But the expectations around kind of a desire for meaningful work, a sense of social purpose, clear career development, progression pathways, and a work-life balance. These workforce expectations and how well they can adapt to these workforce expectations are becoming increasingly recognised as, okay, this is important. The last element was confidence and supporting employees with additional needs. So there was quite a bit of variety among the organisations we talked to on this, and generally a correlation that smaller organisations had less confidence around understanding what might constitute a reasonable adjustment in practice, particularly for people who may be neurodiverse or disabled employees. It was, people would be supportive in principle. They'd say, okay, well, I think we need to do this, but they felt really uncertain about what they were expected or to provide, what they could practically do. And that was a running theme throughout conversations. So that's a summary of the viewpoints that were raised to us when we were asking employees about their thoughts on employing people who've been at work for a while, or trying to support staff who were at risk of leaving. Or the next point is just to summarise some of the existing practices, particularly around the retention in particular. So flexible and adaptive working practices. So this is often, for some organisations, was a legacy of COVID for many. it's really particularly important, recognized important for those with caring responsibilities, parents, and very common for the office-based type roles and jobs. In operational roles, though, this flexibility was mentioned through doing changing shift design, for example, and working with employees about when would be appropriate shifts for them. Reasonable adjustments was more often mentioned by medium or larger organisations who had more experience of supporting employees with changing personal circumstances, often underpinned by a formal HR process. But there's uneven ability to implement in practice across the businesses, with, like I mentioned, smaller and micro organisations struggling to do so, or struggling to always feel confident in what the right step is to take. Some adjusted their recruitment and onboarding processes using a buddy system. Some reference schemes like disability confident accreditation as being helpful to improve their practices with this. Often linked to the above point, but the types of health and well-being support that were raised included things like a private healthcare plan, having kind of occupational health providers that they worked with and brought in as and when needed, staff training for mental health first aiders, wellbeing workshops, mindfulness sessions. So there was a quite range of interventions talked about and existing practices talked about, but the depth and consistency varied across organisations on this. Office roles were most likely to engage and receive these sort of benefits, and then I think what was interesting was that they also came to expect some of these benefits more, particularly things around the private healthcare plans. But yeah, there was generally a sense of when we're having conversations, a sense of trying to understand a bit around how far have people gone with this. They might just say, well, we did do the mindfulness sessions and called it a day. So there's definitely an inconsistency on this. The next point is about fostering a responsive culture. So some talked about supporting their managers on this is how you engage with the employees, this is how you make sure you have those one-to-ones, and making sure it was common practice. Not all organizations necessarily did this. Some kind of undertake these sort of culture naturally, more intuitively, depending on who they are as an organization. On the skills development and career progression, and this was in response often to the workforce, the changing workforce expectations, actually, from one of the organisations, and they kind of directly cited that they really need to focus on what is the career route here to be helping some of their staff to, particularly I was thinking about young people who are a bit more fleeting from particularly not as loyal to one particular employer. So developing kind of training that says this is where you could end up going, and sessions where they have those conversations and discussing openly that there is a career. This role could lead to a career, not just beyond this, or not just within this organization, but also beyond this organization. They thought were positive conversations to help deal with those changing workforce expectations and a sense of uncertainty. Like I mentioned previously, when I talked about the kind of challenging job conditions, organisations with these roles have been doing some interventions to try and prevent them, but the actual effectiveness of these interventions have been mixed, let's say. They're not always confident that they actually really changed the dial too much. And the last element was financial and practical support. So one example being this perk box scheme that one employer implemented in response to what their employees were asking for. Um, mm, so a couple of we in the report you find that there is some case studies that we pull out, and we ask, from speaking to organizations, we ask them, would you be okay if we featured you as a case study? So I just pulled two out here. The first one is the York Carer Centre. I think in particular, I thought they were a good case study because of the fact that many of their employees are carers themselves. Employees are carers themselves, and so they've developed a workplace practices that are really tailored to supporting carers who are often a group at risk of leaving the workforce. And they've done this as a relatively small VCSE organisation. So their approach included the flexible working practices that we discussed. They said they really wanted to focus on outcomes with their employees, not just, are they doing the number of hours? They really thought having a culture of trust and autonomy for their employees is really important for them and for that flexibility. Enhanced work leave for their carers. So they talked about up to 2 weeks of additional leave time on top of annual leave for some of their employees who are carers. They had a dedicated wellbeing and mental health support, including occupational health team that they worked with. And they cited they have low turnout and the staff who've worked for them for over 20 years. The other case study was a medium-sized employee in Ripon, a manufacturing global distributor. They talked about the flexible working arrangements around shift design to help with their employees who are in the warehouse. They set up a peer-to-peer transport support WhatsApp chat. So this is a low-cost intervention to help with their rural location, but essentially it just meant helped car sharing, those who were kind of on bikes. If it's raining on a day, people would then have naturally said, "Oh, I'm gonna go this way," and went off and anyone need a lift, and they thought that this was kind of all that HR have done has helped facilitate natural conversations between employees. They really prioritize having these one-to-one conversations with their staff and the management to help with workload and stress and to review that. And they're always reviewing the development progression opportunities for their staff and making the staff aware of that. I'm just going to pass back over to John for this slide.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for bringing that to life. Yeah, having spoken to 45 employers, understanding a lot more in detail, having undertaken that research, we also decided to have a look elsewhere. So rather than doing this at the beginning, we were sort of shaped by what we'd heard from businesses, and there were a few points that we just sort of wanted to highlight. There's a lot on this slide, but maybe a couple of if I just sort of do a deep dive into. So one was around sort of value-based recruitment, and the NHS is sort of moving towards this for certain roles. So it shifts sort of the emphasis from formal experience to behaviours, attitudes, and alignment with some of their values. And it means that individuals where their work history might be sort of less linear really allows them to explore opportunities. Another one, and I think specifically the case study that Josh mentioned there just sort of made us sort of think around this. So reverse mentoring, so that you've got organizations like PwC, where you have reverse mentoring programs whereby some of the more junior staff are helping senior leaders sort of understand a bit more about organizational culture, decision making, lived experience around, how do you get to work, that kind of thing. We've explored this in other projects whereby it's not, sometimes it's less about mentoring, but it's about listening sometimes, and people just sort of flagging, I can't start work at this time because there isn't the transport infrastructure. If we could just shift patterns a little bit, then there might be further sort of flexibility around that. Some of you may also be sort of aware of sort of stay interviews as well, just to understand what might keep someone in work. So I suppose sort of a bit like a formal review that someone might have, but actually maybe sort of emphasizing around keeping people and retention around that. So just rather than being a bit reactive to someone exiting, it just sort of has a proactive retention sort of element around this. And clearly sort of around pay transparency as well. We've also had some really sort of interesting discussions with employers on other projects, but this is why we were able to sort of bring the learning from those around some employers sort of targeting roles to meet the needs of their needs, but also the needs of those specific groups. So, for example, visitor economy employers struggling to fill evening and weekend shifts. They targeted females that are returning to work following childcare or other situations, and that offered them greater flexibility, predictable hours, and they were able to fill positions a lot easier, but also created a bit of a network of staff to draw upon, which certainly helped them with some of their recruitment challenges as well. Next slide, please, Josh. So we also created having sort of identified all of the businesses and spoken to them, we thought it might be useful to put these businesses into a bit of a framework. Now, we've got sort of 4 categories here because we think that might be sort of helpful to move forward with maybe designing interventions, for example, but also thinking about, because whilst all businesses have individual characteristics, being able to sort of group them a little bit means that targeted information and interventions have perhaps a bit more value for money around that. So whilst we'd advocate certainly sort of like individualized support for businesses, actually sort of having this framework can help sort of group some of that. So just starting with reactive businesses, these are those that have limited capacity and workforce issues are perhaps not a strategic focus, so they respond to issues as they arrive. That might require a bit more of a sort of short-term, informal responses to retention and recruitment challenges. Those that are responsive, difference between reactive and responsive is there's a bit more of a growing awareness, and they have some practices that are making them think about inclusive recruitment or retention. They make adjustments in specific cases, but in general perhaps don't have policies in place or a view, and so that sort of approach is maybe sort of partial and inconsistent, really. Around more structured, this is where there is more established management practices. There's sort of policies, views, papers perhaps in place. So there's some of those behaviours might include sort of more flexible working, staff support mechanisms. There's a consistent approach to retention and workforce management. And then strategic, and often some of the bigger businesses sort of fall into this category, but not all. And so that's where workforce is seen as a core business priority. There's proactive planning, inclusive recruitment approaches, retention planning. Workforce development is linked to longer term business performance. So sort of designing interventions around those, you can sort of think about some of those where activity might need to be sort of focused within that framework. Next slide, please, Josh.
Cool. So this next section is our recommendations, but it's also reflecting on what we heard from employers around what they would like to see from not just the combined authority, but councils and public sector organisations, often grouping them in their descriptions. So just to summarise what we heard when we were asking them about these issues, and then also what they felt about the existing support. Often intent exists to do the right thing, but their confidence in uneven and capacity could be scarce. Their view on support was it often feels fragmented, with not necessarily a clear entry route. So we've broke responses into 3 groups here. Focus on clarity, a focus on confidence, and a focus on capacity. So building clarity. So this is really what employers were saying to us. They wanted to have a really clear single front door to find support, and to make that really clear on how they get connected into the system, and really starting to view it. There's lots of support out there, all by different names. They're not sure what schemes are live, what programs are live. Some come, some go. Particularly, this has been a challenge in recent years when it comes to funding envelopes with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, for example, and then we have the Trailblazer, which is 1 year, then 1 year. So it feels like to the employers that there's a bit of a messy landscape, and they're not sure that what is this official support or not official support. So one thing that they wanted to hear from us is really, really clear. So we believe things like the Growth Hub could be a really clear front door that is the main brand that the combined authority leads with. So this is where you get your employment support. And when you enter there, there's either an online form system or there's somebody that you can speak to that helps you to go through a diagnostic type exercise and consider to help you navigate the available support options out there and ones that are most appropriate for you or your organisation or your staff. And then they go on to the courses and come back to the same individual to support them. And it feels like a unified journey altogether. And that will help them navigate these consistent amount of programs. And this is the type of feedback we've also heard from businesses in other areas, not just North Yorkshire generally. The other is building confidence. So many employers felt like they need to know what good looks like within their own context. The main point here being having really clear guidance packs around. This is a simplified kind of one-pager understanding of what your requirements are as employers, examples of what has been done, practical examples, really wanting lots of practical examples and case studies, and making sure that these were sector or organisation size specific, were reiterated again to us as something they'd really want. But also, I've used the term guidance packs, and I think packs actually makes us think about a wad of paper or a PDF document. But alternative kind of approaches being taken, like podcasts, short video snippets. There was a want for like really easy bite-sized bits of information, because at the minute it feels like there's lots of information out there, but it feels like navigating it can be challenging. And to know that this is the one that's applicable to me and my organisation. And then somewhere that they could get very general advice for free and impartial around their small queries. The awareness of existing schemes as well, so things like the DWP access to work, awareness of that was generally quite low, despite those who've used the scheme saying it was good. And the third set is around building capacity. So targeted interventions to help develop a business capacity to improve their inclusive employment practices. Split these into 2 groups. So those that are the intensive direct support, for things like wage subsidy schemes were mentioned as popular. Some would like support funding for their workplace wellbeing initiatives. Could they have help to go on mental health first aid training and to backfill some staff? Many talked about entry kind of level things and entry level kind of HR training courses, but they wanted more specific kind of going into a higher level experience, not just the introductions, and they needed backfill support to really to go with that, potentially finance to help with the cost of attending training. So not just training being free, but also potentially actually needing help with the opportunity cost of how to attend that training. Regards to hands-on support to redesign job roles, navigate reasonable adjustments, or even developing kind of onboarding processes and those early stage development marks for employees coming in. Then there was a couple of regional kind of wide support network ideas that were brought to us. So one of them was this idea for a cross SME EDI network. Some organisation talked about how the EDI networks within them were really helpful for identifying those problems, but there were larger organisations that could have them. One smaller organisation kind of referenced, well, we could what if across SMEs they had within a sector they tried to establish EDI networks. Retirement mentor and skills transfer. So talked about that reverse mentoring. One employer mentioned about staff leaving, or to help stem the flow of skills leaving the organisation as more experienced staff retire, having a scheme that they could either volunteer their time or get paid for their time to offer mentoring and skills transfer to a younger generation within the same sector. And then the other was wanting really to encourage employers to take part in work experience and placement schemes. Many felt that those who had experience employing people who've potentially been out of work for a while. We talked earlier about those kind of uncertainties around not, assumptions around who people are who've been out of work, breaking down those assumptions through placement schemes to help people build up the experience, get the references, and some then stay on afterwards. John, there's a couple of kind of strategic recommendations coming out of our research.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Two main sort of strategic recommendations. One was around potential. We are very aware that engaging with employers does not operate just within employment support. So that probably shapes these two strategic recommendations. One is that employment support engaging with businesses is seen as a system, and there are moves by several other combined authorities around exploring what a new model of employment support might look like. Colleagues in AMION and CADA Research doing some work in West Yorkshire, which is looking at a new model. We're also aware of other combined authorities looking at new models for employment support, and I think what this is sort of highlighting is, if we're going to engage with employers as a system and in a connected way, then that needs to be part of a movement for a movement towards a new model. And I think that there's also sort of the strategic rationale from the Milburn review, which also highlighted, or the interim Milburn review, which highlighted that we don't need more pilots and more sort of short-term projects. Actually, we need system change. And so is there the potential for this? I think there probably is, and particularly with devolved levers coming forward. Mentioned at the beginning, engagement with businesses is really sort of critical, but it is challenging. And we were just also sort of aware that the businesses that we were engaging with had that sort of layer of other research happening. But similarly, if we're then engaging with them around interventions, they may also receive engagement from business support. organisations, including the universities and others, there is likely to be sort of further engagement through different strands of work, whether that's around feeding into other interventions. But I think what is perhaps needed is just a bit of further sort of employer engagement mapping, and just ensuring maybe that could be connected to a long-term future model, but may involve, for example, a shared CRM, just so there's a sort of a clarity around how businesses are being engaged. I think many of the businesses and the employer representative body that we spoke to said, oh yeah, we're sort of constantly in engagement around how we can engage with employers and how we can best sort of serve some of the needs. And there's an information sharing element of that, but if it happens in a more connected and coordinated way, it reduces the burden on employers. So that shaped two of our strategic recommendations for this piece. I think we'll pause there, won't we, Josh? We've tried to bring it to life. We've got lots of findings from that. So thank you so much. We'll just pause here, I suppose, for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, John and Josh. That's a really great webinar into this very insightful piece of and timely piece of research. I'll just stop the recording and then